For all things Halloween. This is Hauntformer, and welcome back, recruits, to the cult of the cults. I started this series a few years ago because I constantly get people asking me, hey Mac, hey Hauntformer, what horror movies do you recommend for me to watch, especially around the spooky season? And you know, typically I give the same few answers because there are those respected horror films that are just classics for a reason. The Shining and The Exorcist and Halloween, of course, but there are so many other horror films that deserve your attention. And this series praises a lot of films that you may not be familiar with. In this episode, we're going to explore 5 more sinister horror films that you've probably never seen that you really should. They're going to be spanning a lot of different subgenres and a lot of different time periods, so get your popcorn ready and let's dive in to these 5 underrated classics.
And you'll go down in history with me.
I saw his face. I stood there. I did nothing.
Johnny!
Stephen King, The Dead Zone.
Based upon the Stephen King novel, in fact I have it right here, of the same name, The Dead Zone is a 1983 horror film by David Cronenberg, who is a pretty successful horror icon in his own right. He directed The Fly and Videodrome and a lot of other classic body horror films. The Dead Zone is quite unlike his work, but I think it's one of his best. The film follows a school teacher, go figure, it's a Stephen King story, in Maine, again, go figure, who discovers that he has a weird psychic ability to see into a person's past or future, and it leads him into a whole bunch of circumstances that get darker and darker as they go. The Dead Zone isn't exactly a horror movie, per se. I suppose it's more of a psychological thriller, but sometimes those are my favorite types of horror movies, so I'm going to throw it into the list, and I think it qualifies. The film does get rather dark, it does have some grotesque scenes, and it stars a pretty young Christopher Walken at the time, who does a really bang-up job at the character of John Smith. Now, if the name John Smith sounds pretty cliche or generic, that's because Stephen King meant for this character to be the everyman, and you can really feel it in the first 20 minutes of the movie. This is a character-driven story. He's a very relatable guy. He just wants to live his life, but constantly has this psychic ability oozing into his life. Stephen King is not a stranger to psychic abilities. You think of Carrie, you think of The Shining, you think of even like Firestarter. There are a lot of characters of his that have strange powers, but I think The Dead Zone is one of his strongest works. It dives into some crime mystery stuff, it gets into kind of political thriller territory, it jumps all over the place, but as long as you care about the central character, you're gonna love this movie. I've watched it already about 3 times this season since I first watched it back in August, and it is quickly becoming one of my new classic favorites.
From the novel by Stephen King, creator of Carrie and The Shining, comes a startling vision of fear.
Please, God, get me out of here.
Now there's a new name for terror. Kujo.
Sticking with the Stephen King trend, I sadly don't... Oh, I do have the book, it's over there. Kujo is another great film that was adapted from one of his books, and Stephen King says it's one of the best adaptations of his work, too. Now, they take some liberties with it, because if you've read the book, you know that there are a lot of tangents, but at its heart, Kujo is the story of a rabid dog that goes after a mother and her son while they're stuck in her car during the blistering summer. Yes, it's a summertime film, but for whatever reason, they play it all the time on TV around Halloween, and so I think it's pretty readily available if you just go on AMC's Fear Fest. The film while most people have probably heard of Kujo, isn't talked about all that much, and it's a darn shame. There are a few pacing issues toward the end of the movie, but overall, Kujo is one of my favorites, especially when it comes to creature features. Kujo is a sympathetic villain, of course, because he is a very sweet Saint Bernard at the beginning of the movie, but over time you see how he deteriorates and turns into this rabid monster. What's great about the movie, aside from the dog stuff, because it takes a little while to get there, is that the story is more about how bad circumstances just sort of happen. Life is freaky in that way, and you can't really prepare for this kind of thing. It's a great story, very interesting characters, and one very sinister rabid dog who we all know and love, Kujo.
The Mangler.
I'm gonna finish the Stephen King streak with one movie based on his short story, The Mangler. The movie has the same name, of course. It has Robert Englund in it and Ted Levine of Silence of the Lambs fame. It follows a detective who discovers that there may just be a demonically possessed laundry press at a laundry plant. What? This movie is bizarre, okay? I can't say that it's good in the traditional sense, but if you can suspend your disbelief and have a fun time with it, this movie will take you for a ride. It is pretty critically panned. Most people hated it when it came out in the 90s, but I think it's pretty darn fun. It's very spooky, it's got some crazy special effects, and it's highly underrated. I have never heard anyone talk about The Mangler, but the short story is really good if you have time to read it, and the movie is also a fun time. If you want to not take it seriously and go into a strange, demonically possessed laundry press movie, well, you can't get better than The Mangler.
Lake Mongo.
Okay, I'm stepping off the Stephen King soapbox. We have two other classic movies to talk about. I'm going to start with a newer classic that I really think deserves your attention, Lake Mungo. This movie came out in the 2000s, and it's an Australian horror film. It follows a family who had an accident involving their daughter, or in the brother's case, his sister, and you begin to figure out that maybe her spirit is trying to communicate with them from the other side, or at least there's some strange paranormal happenings in their quaint home. The film is set up like a mockumentary. It's a fake documentary, very similar to the Poughkeepsie tapes, and has found footage elements that you'd expect in a movie like The Blair Witch Project. I went into this movie not sure of what to expect. It has very good word of mouth from the people who have seen it, and I found it to be not only a real bang-up movie, an incredible production, and incredible acting, but even more so, it was really darn creepy. It's not the type of movie that'll make you jump out of your seat or anything like that, but it will crawl under your skin and stay there. Lake Mungo was a really creepy time, and the ending will leave you with a chill down your spine.
Now the patients have a new doctor.
Help me!
But will he cure them?
Wear that uniform! Try to take it off and you'll die in it!
Or become one of them?
He comes to take over the mental asylum and he's nuts himself. Who are you?
Stacy Keach stars in The Ninth Configuration.
And finally, I'm going to end this list on a film that I've seen numerous times since I first watched it earlier this year. I think it really deserves your attention, but I admit it may not be for everyone, and it's not completely a horror film by every standard. If you know The Exorcist, which is one of the greatest horror films of all time, then the name William Peter Blatty might ring a bell. He's the guy that wrote the original novel that the film's based on and went on to direct The Exorcist 3, which is one of the best sequels ever made. However, a lot of people don't know that he directed another movie based on another creepy book that he wrote. It's called The Ninth Configuration. The film is about a psychiatrist that goes to a strange mental institution in an old abandoned castle where the inmates are somewhat allowed to run amok and give in to their strange impulses and desires. The film is a slow burn, very character heavy, and rich in both philosophy and theology. It asks a lot of questions about God and about the nature of humanity. It's more of a deep, twirl your glass thinking type of horror movie, but it also has a lot of great shock sequences, really good dialogue, and a lot of humorous bits as well. If you like the style and writing of The Exorcist and The Exorcist 3, I really couldn't recommend The Ninth Configuration any higher. It's a movie that is pretty readily available if you go on streaming services, and though it may not catch your attention right away, you'll be surprised at how much you might enjoy it. The Ninth Configuration is a great movie, extremely criminally underrated, and deserves your attention. Well, there you go. 5 iconic horror films that you may have not seen, but I hope you'll give them the chance this Halloween. If you liked this video and want to see more like it, leave a comment and a like below, and I'll see you in the next video. Remember, for all things Halloween, this is Hauntformer.